Hello, anatomy students. This is Mr. Ward, and we have a quick mini lesson on muscle tissue and nervous tissue for today. This is a quick review from our last class, but just a good reminder of some of the characteristics of muscle tissue. So muscle tissue, remember, is highly cellular, which means it is made primarily of cells. There's not much, if any, extracellular matrix, unlike connective tissue. It's well vascularized, which means it has a very good blood supply. And as you know, it is responsible for most different types of body movement, whether it's actual physical movement from one place to another or moving materials throughout the body. Muscle tissue does that for us. The muscle cells are not round and circular. They're more elongated, almost cylindrical in appearance. And within inside the actual cell are thousands of smaller fibers that act very much like the muscle cell itself. So it is certainly a different shape, which of course relates to its function. Being able to contract, being able to shorten is an important characteristic of muscle tissue. And within the muscle cells, those thinner fibers are called actin and myosin. We'll be learning more about them when we get to our muscular system chapter. But actin and myosin will literally kind of move over top of each other, which allows them to shorten, which allows the muscle cell to shorten. And when all these muscle cells do make a coordinated effort to shorten, that ends up being a muscular contraction. There are three types of muscle tissue that I'll be going over today, which are skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and lastly, smooth muscle tissue. So we'll start with skeletal muscle tissue, which again are long cylindrical cells. They contain many nuclei. So when you're looking at them under the microscope, such as the picture at the bottom, you can see this kind of dark blackish area, and there seems to be more than one within the actual muscle cell. That's what you're looking at right here. The white area here represents the space between adjacent muscle cells. So that's one of the characteristics when you're looking at them, whether it's under the microscope or looking at them on our medical images, there'll be more than one nucleus per cell. They have a banded appearance. You can certainly see that in the actual live image here, but you can also see it in the diagram where we have kind of a thinner line and then a darker band. These bands represent the structural units of the muscle cell called a sarcomere. When multiple sarcomeres are all shortening together, that makes a contraction. When they're lengthening or returning to their resting state, it appears that they're actually lengthening. But those bands represent the structural units of the muscle cell for muscular contraction. That's another way to be able to tell them from other types. Skeletal muscle is also packaged in connective tissue. If you've ever looked at chicken fillet or a beef fillet before being prepared, there's that kind of whitish area around it. It may not necessarily be fat, but especially with chicken, they have that kind of like white, almost like cellophane-like wrapping, and that's connective tissue, and that helps to kind of maintain the shape of the muscle cell and the compartment in which it resides in. So primary function certainly is the ability to allow us to move. However, it's also involved in, because of its highly cellular life, it creates a lot of extra heat during cellular respiration, which allows us to maintain our stable body temperature. So we can thank our skeletal muscles, even when they're not doing a lot of work, for allowing us to maintain that stable body temperature. The next type of connective tissue is cardiac muscle tissue found in the wall of the heart. So we have four chambers to our heart. The ventricles are the forceful pumps of the heart. The atria are more the filling chambers of the heart, but the wall of the heart itself is made of cardiac muscle tissue. And its job, of course, is to contract, which allows the blood to be pumped through the body, through the different blood vessels. So pumping, whether it's pumping it to the lungs to pick up some oxygen or pumping it to other body regions to deliver oxygen and other nutrients to the rest of the tissues of the body. That's its job. One of the differences between skeletal muscle tissue and cardiac muscle tissue, there's only one nucleus per cell, so we call that uninucleate. However, they are striated, as are the skeletal muscle cells. However, as you can see in the diagram here, there's a little bit of a white space here, and you see it more prominent in the actual image of a real cardiac muscle tissue, and that's actually the branching appearance under the microscope on a medical graph here. So certainly you can see the nuclei stained in kind of that darker purple color, but the little white areas represent the branching aspect of cardiac muscle tissue. Between each successive muscle is a small junction of sorts. It's called a tight junction, which is a term for where two cells meet in animals. And there's a little opening called the intercalated disc. It's not necessarily an opening. It's has small pores, which allow for ions to flow from one cardiac muscle cell to the next, which aids in its ability to create electrical activity to pump the different chambers of the heart within a rhythmic pattern. So these ions diffuse rapidly through these discs, these junctions, which aids in a fast, rapid electrical impulse, which causes the chambers of the heart to pump in the right time and the right rhythm. And as you probably know, we do not consciously control cardiac muscle contractions. There's a very famous movie actor who played a great character, Indiana Jones, and I think it was in the second Indiana Jones movie, The Temple of Doom. The bad guy in the movie reaches into the body cavity of one of the unsuspecting people in the movie and pulls out the heart and holds it up to the camera, and there's the heart pumping. And it's true that the heart does not necessarily need constant nerve impulses from the brain to create that rhythmic pattern of beating. But we'll be talking a lot more about that when we get to our muscular system chapter. And our last type of muscle tissue for today is smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue, also called visceral muscle, because it wraps around many of the organs of the body. One of its characteristics is it lacks striations. So we don't see the same banding pattern, certainly not in the diagram and not within the actual image of real smooth muscle tissue. It does have some different unique traits that we don't see in the other two as well, especially the long spindly ends of this smooth muscle tissue, and also just one nucleus. So like cardiac muscle, it has one nucleus. Unlike cardiac muscle, there are no striations. And it's found primarily in the walls of hollow organs. So our stomach, as you can see in the image here, we have the stomach, the large intestine, the small intestines. We have muscle tissue that's wrapped around these organs that allows them to push the food or the undigested food through the digestive system. And it does this through alternating contractions and relaxations called peristalsis. It's a wave-like contraction that kind of squeezes the foodstuffs through the digestive system. We also have smooth muscle tissue wrapped around our blood vessels, and it literally does kind of squeeze and push blood through the blood vessels. So the job of smooth muscle tissue is movement. However, it's movement within the body, unlike skeletal muscle, which is movement of bones for locomotion purposes. And as we wrap up our connective tissue section, we're going to end with nervous tissue. And here's a great picture of one neuron with its long cytoplasmic extensions, which certainly relate structure to function, the ability to transmit information over a long distance. It's great to have a cell that is long and spindly, and that's exactly what the cells look like. So nervous tissue, of course, makes up the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves that either exit the brain or the spinal cord to different parts of the body. And the main type of cell, and that word I use is important, is main. There are other types of nervous tissue cells, but the one that we'll focus on today is neurons. But there are a number of other ones that we'll be talking about when we get to the nervous system chapter. And it's their job to generate these electrical impulses. And it's due to these long cytoplasmic extensions. This area that I'm circling here with my cursor, you can see that kind of darker region. You might say that looks like the nucleus, and you would be right. There are other organelles within the cell body, which is the main portion of the neuron. So we have mitochondria, of course. We have the Golgi apparatus. Remember that neurons are not able to divide. They are amitotic. We are born with a certain number of neurons, and we won't be able to replace them. In not all cases, but in many cases, they just will not have the ability to divide. So they are delicate, certainly in nature. And there are other supporting cells we'll be talking about, and you can't really see them in this picture here, but there are certain cells that will literally kind of support the neuron in its place. It will provide protection. They'll help give nutrients to the neuron. So there are a number of other cells that do not conduct impulses, but are still part of nervous tissue. And these supporting cells do exactly like they support it. They insulate it. There are types of cells that literally wrap around the long cytoplasmic extensions called the axon. And the axon carries electrical impulses away from the cell body, whereas dendrites, which are the other cytoplasmic extensions, will carry electrical impulses towards the cell body. So there are cells that literally will wrap around the axons to provide an insulative covering to allow for faster ion flow down the length of the neuron. And that brings us to tissue repair, which we'll be covering in our next class. That's just a quick little mini lesson on muscle tissue and nervous tissue. So I will see you in class on Friday, and of course on Virtual Wednesday.